I left Caltech and knew that if I didn't do something soon, you see, at Caltech, you would be in the ROTC. This was a program that could let you avoid being drafted as long as you were in school. When you graduated, you were also made an officer in the Army. And then you could be drafted into the Army, and you'd be an officer instead of an enlisted man. And so everyone at Caltech was in ROTC. So when I left Caltech, I knew that I would be drafted because the Korean War was still on. But I joined the Air Force. So getting into the Air Force was very peculiar. So you want to know about that? Okay, so I first had to take an exam in Los Angeles. And I remember this because they had a strip. They said, strip to your shorts. So you take off your shirt, pants, shoes, and you have your underwear on. There was a young man, one of the people there, he was obviously poorer than me. He was so poor, he never washed his shorts, and they were so dirty, he was ashamed to have them. So he didn't know what to do, and he finally decided having nothing on would be better than wearing those dirty shorts. And so, but he created quite a stir in the situation he was in. And so it was, you know, unpleasant in a sense for me to see him suffer. Anyway, so when I went up to take this exam, I was my usual flippant self. You know, I had this great self-confidence. So I knew my brother had a very hard time to become a pilot. And then he would take the test, flunk, and then he finally enlisted in the Air Force as an enlisted man. And because while you were an enlisted man, you could apply to be flight training. And so, and finally he got it. He got through. And he thought it was because his blood pressure was too high. So, as we are taking this test, there's something weird going on, you know. They're flunking people right and left, you know. So I remember you had to have perfect vision. I didn't wear glasses at all then. So amongst the tests, you had to have near vision, far vision, you know. So someone is giving me a test, you know, and he has this chart. He has it here, and he starts moving it away, and I'm supposed to read it. So I start reading it, and I'm reading it, and I'm reading it. And he says, "You flunked." I says, "What do you mean I flunked?" He says, "Well, I got too far away." I said, "I was reading it." "Yes," he said, "but you didn't tell me to stop." I said, "Okay, do that again." And he says, "Okay, I'll do it again." I say, "Stop," and I read it. Okay. He says, "Well, you flunked again." And I said, "Why this time?" He says, "You read it too close." You know, and then, so I said, "What am I supposed to do?" And he says, "You're supposed to read it between like 6 and 9 inches. So I say, "Do it again." So I'm thinking 6. So when I thought it was like 7 inches, I said, "Stop," and I read it, and he says, "Okay, you passed." And so the whole thing was like that. And people are being flunked left and right, you know. And I see one guy, he's all depressed. He says, "I failed this test. I don't know what I'm going to do. I wanted to be a pilot," you know. And everyone's being disappointed and so on and so forth. And so I was accepted into cadets and told I can go home. They'll tell me later on when to report. So I, for the first time, decided I'm going to fly back to Los Angeles. That'll be my first airline flight. And here's the thing. I call this airline California had an airline. Now, in those days, air traffic was regulated by the government. So if an airline wanted to change a price on a route, they had to get government approval, because every airline always charged the same price on, and you couldn't charge less or it was a crime. And because, they picked the amount. And their logic was they wanted to encourage aviation, and, no one could make it for less money except someone trying to drive the others out of business. So that's the federal government doing that. Okay, but in California, which is a big state, and air travel in California was between Los Angeles and San Francisco, a guy dreamt up the idea of starting an airline just in California, because it's a giant market. And his name was Fredkin. And he started up this airline. So, and I didn't know anything about these facts, okay? So I call this airline, I say, I'd like to fly. Is there a plane I can fly back on, from San Francisco to Los Angeles? Yeah, there's one. What's your name? I told him my name. And suddenly, everything changed. They're very solicitous. Which flight do you want? Well, sure, we can have seats on every flight, and this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking, I don't know what, I turned out the guy was the founder of this airline, which was just in California. His last name was like Fredkin, but it was spelled Freidkin. He had an extra I in it, but I didn't know that then. So they're very solicitous. So I get on this airplane, and we're flying back to Los Angeles. There, I see one of the guys on the airplane was one of the testers. So I go over to him and I say, "Hey, weren't you testing?" And he says, yeah, that's my job here. And so I said, "Do you know how many passed?" And he said, 5. I think, Jesus Christ, there were like 200 people that came up there and only 5, and I'm one of the 5. And I thought, I never dreamt I was such a fantastic physical, mental specimen to be selected this way. So I told him, "Hey, I was accepted, and that's pretty good, isn't it?" He says, "Nah, you're wrong." I say, "What do you mean I'm wrong?" He says, "Listen, here's how it worked. Orders came from headquarters. We have 5 slots, flunk the rest." And so these guys all went home thinking there was something wrong with them. Their life was ruined, all because they happened to go up when the Air Force didn't need anybody. And so they kept that a secret and just flunked them. I noticed they were flunking right and left, but I thought it was they wanted to get some perfect specimens. Okay, so in the Air Force, I'm now a pilot in the Air Force. But they wanted me to sign up for more years than the contract. The contract was, okay, you'll go through training, you have to then become a pilot for 3 years. So, and, what they did was, just when I was graduating, what you do is, once you graduate, they would send you to gunnery. Gunnery is where you learn to shoot and drop bombs, Up till then, you're learning to fly. Okay, so I'd already learned to fly, and I'm ready to go to gunnery. And they say, we've just noticed how expensive it is to train you guys. So if you want to go to gunnery, you have to sign up for another year. And it just didn't go along with my plans. And I thought, what the hell? We have it's a contract. You promised I would go through this. I would be a regular officer. They said, well, you're an officer and blah, blah, blah. And what I learned is that the Air Force did whatever it wanted, and until the affected kid, whoever he was the son of either an important congressman or a senator or someone else senior in the government. And that was the case here. When one of these kids who signed up for the 3 years was told, if you want to go to gunnery, finish your training, really, you have to sign up for an extra year. He told his daddy, and his daddy told the Air Force, go to hell, and the Air Force went back and they had to call everybody up, including me, and say, okay, we're sorry we told you that. We shouldn't have done it. So now you can go to gunnery and only finish 3 years. I said, but a year's gone by already, and that would still mean 4 years. Well, they said it's only 3 years after gunnery. So I said, go jump in the lake, to hell with it. I wasn't going to do it, and I don't think anyone else did. So what happened is they just would give me flight assignments, So they decide they're going to make me into an intercept controller. So they send me, and all this time I'm a pilot also, So they send me to a school to learn to intercept. Here's the way interceptors work. They had radar, okay? The radar spots a Russian bomber, and then an interceptor is sent up. So the Russian bomber is a blip on your radar, okay? It's not a special blip, but it's just a blip. Then the fighter they send up is another blip, okay? And they didn't have any simulators. So this was real radars, and they didn't have any Russian bombers, so they would have American pilots fly to train the students. And this training program was very intensive, and you're concentrating, doing things, and so you couldn't do it for long. So what they did was they would run it either in the mornings. The training ran in the mornings or the afternoon for like 3 hours straight, and then you just did nothing the rest of the time. Okay, so I was a pilot, so they needed pilots to fly. So these were jet fighters up there pretending to be bombers or what. So what happened is, since I'm learning how to be an intercept controller, that was like a 3-hour session in the morning or the afternoons. And if it was in the morning, in the afternoon, I would be one of the ones flying, and I would either be assigned to be a pretend Russian bomber or a pretend fighter, interceptor, and the guys on the ground, they had no simulators then, would be giving me instructions, say. And it was always, they had this formality. If they said, starboard or port, you started a turn immediately. So say you're flying north and they say starboard, that's to the, or say port. Port is to the left and starboard's to the right. So say you're going north and they say starboard 270, that's west, okay? So you'd start a turn. Now, in a jet, it takes a long time to turn. So the guy on the ground, whose radar has this little blip on the screen, he sees this airplane slowly turning, and to make a 90-degree turn when you're going very fast, it takes a long time, several minutes. Okay. So I'm flying it half days, and the other half days I'm one of the students down there. And I'm bored as usual when I'm flying it. Okay, so I decide I figured out a way to do a trick. Okay, it was a simple thing. You know, when you're flying north and they say they want you to turn to the west, to make a 90-degree turn, you're supposed to roll into a 60-degree bank, and then you turn. It takes almost, seems like forever. It takes several minutes to make a 90-degree turn. So I figured out a way to make those turns all exactly, or whatever they told me, any turn, I could do it exactly with a perfect corner. And here's how. I'm flying along. They'd say, go make a 90-degree turn to the left. Instead of rolling like this and going along a very long time to make that turn, I would pull up vertically, roll to my U heading, go over this way and then down, and on the radar, and you looked exactly so. So I start doing that and figuring, oh, I'm being helpful to this poor student because it takes a long time to figure out what you're going to do because this turn takes so long to make, so you have to turn him way too soon, you know, or start him. So, okay. So this funny thing happened. You hear the instructor would walk around and help the students, you know, and he would talk on the radio to you and sometimes. Okay. So a student tells me to make this turn. Well, instead of doing the turn, I just would pull up vertically. And when I'm going vertically, I would turn the airplane, roll the airplane this way or that way to the new heading and then go down, because I knew on the radar it would look exactly like a perfect angle. Whatever the angle was, it would be a sharp point instead of the long, laborious turn. Okay, so, you know, the student is flummoxed by my behavior. But then I hear the instructor's voice. I recognized it. And he gives me one turn after another. And then he announces, attention all aircraft. You're free to, we're ending the mission today. So you're free to do whatever you want. Just, you know, don't run out of, you know, you have to be careful not to run out of fuel, but you can go practice aerobatics, do what you like. Okay. And he explained, there's something wrong with the radar. So I did that once. I kept doing things, whatever. I had tremendous fun being a pilot in the Air Force.